Hello, and welcome back to the Hearsay podcast, a joint project between Pro Bono Students Canada, University of Calgary chapter, and CJSW 90.9 FM. This is a podcast where University of Calgary law students discuss a variety of legal topics with a plethora of professionals in the field. We'd like to emphasize that the information you hear today is legal information and not legal advice, as we are law students and not lawyers. This podcast is purely for informational purposes. If you do require legal advice, please consult a lawyer, as there is no substitute for a professional. My name is Dylan Clark, and together with my partner Gabrielle Freeman, today we will be concluding our discussion with Jody Freeman, a Canadian-born Harvard law professor who also happens to be the aunt of my partner Gabrielle. In today's discussion, we will dive further into structural deregulation and how the Trump administration has been handling environmental policy and regulation. In addition, we will also be highlighting some of the potential impacts on Canada. In the spirit of reconciliation, we would first like to acknowledge that Hearsay is recorded on Treaty 7 territory. We would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. I would also like to note that the University of Calgary is situated on the land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, and that the traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mohkinstsis, which we now call the City of Calgary. We pick up from last time by continuing our discussion on structural deregulation, a process by which the Trump administration is making massive cuts to specific agencies of the American federal government that they deem to be too large or unnecessary. You're listening to the Hearsay podcast on CJSW 90.9 FM.
I understand their motive, for this power, but what I don't understand is that they will no longer be efficient, and that looks bad on them. So that's the part that I'm just
So this is a really smart point, and some commentators have said they're not even doing something in their own interest, because if you core out the agencies you need to accomplish your agenda, nobody's going to be there to do the work, right? Now, what I say to that is, I think they're this is very much the Elon Musk approach to what he did at Twitter and what he does with his businesses, which is you go in with a sledgehammer, or as he held up at a political meeting recently, a chainsaw. He literally held up a chainsaw at a conservative political meeting recently to celebrate that he was taking a chainsaw to the federal government. And you go in and you decimate the employee base, and then you go, oh, whoops, I broke it. I better go fix it. And taking that approach to government is extremely dangerous. So it was revealed they, by mistake, fired a bunch of people who were experts at, I think it was nuclear cleanups or nuclear dismantling. I forget. It had to do with nuclear facilities. And they realized they fired the nuclear scientists or something. I may be getting this about 85% correct, but it is basically correct. And they realized they couldn't do without these people from a safety perspective. They had to go back and try to find them, but they couldn't find them because they had also deleted all their emails. So this is clownish behavior. You can't run a government this way, but they seem to think you can. So if you break it first and you sort of think, well, I can fix it later, that doesn't often work when you're talking about this level of expertise and the way the government works. And I think that's the danger here, is that they're going to make a bunch of mistakes. I think they're trying to preserve the people they need to carry out their agenda. I think, for example, law enforcement agencies, ICE, the immigration bureaus and agencies. I think they're trying not to core those out because those are essential to the pledge to deport millions of people. So they may think, I'm speculating, but they may think, well, we can save the core of what we care about, and we'll get rid of the rest. Like, we'll basically core out the Department of Education because we don't believe we should have a federal Department of Education. And we'll basically decimate USAID because we don't care about foreign aid and, all the people dependent on humanitarian assistance for food and medicine overseas. We don't particularly care about that, and the public won't care about that. So we'll quote that. So I think they may have a feeling that they'll preserve enough to do the main stuff they want to do. But as you say, it's pretty hard to carry out your agenda when you're indiscriminately running around firing people, making mistakes, and hoping maybe you can plug the holes later. I mean, if I weren't saying this to you right now, I would think someone was making this up if it weren't true. I just want to be clear that my mission as a law professor who teaches in these fields, I teach administrative law, which has to do with agencies, government stuff, and my environmental work. I just want to be really clear that I'm deeply committed to the rule of law and legal institutions and norms around a balance of power. But I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't fix overly bureaucratic agencies. I'm not suggesting that we've got everything right here. I've worked in the government. There are moments when you slap yourself on the forehead and go, how is this taking so long? Like, I get it. And for sure, we could spend taxpayer money more efficiently, like no question about it. But there are responsible, thoughtful ways of figuring out how to do better, how to reform, how to hire better people, the best people, how to trim out some of the bureaucratic excess, how to make things move faster, how to accelerate permitting. I'm for all of this. But this is not the way to do it. You don't take a sledgehammer to this process. You have to do it thoughtfully.
In what ways could structural deregulation in the U.S. affect Canada, particularly concerning cross-border issues such as environmental protection, trade, and security?
Well, that's a very big question, and I'm not an expert on trade. I'm not a national security expert, but what I will say is when the United States is acting erratically, chaotically, unpredictably, and changing its foreign policy apparently to be transactional above all else, what's in it for us. Every country that believes itself to be an ally of the United States gets worried. And Canada, being the closest neighbor and being the biggest trading partner, is of course going to be affected by what the U.S. does. Tariffs are an example, and we can talk a little bit about it, but if the U.S. decides to follow through on these threatened tariffs, which is holding over everybody's head, I think we're in abeyance now in Canada for the moment, although I guess the steel tariff was implemented. But if there really is going to be across the board 25% tariffs, I mean, it's devastating potentially to the Canadian economy. And it's also bad for the U.S. economy, potentially, very likely, because consumer prices very likely will go up. So I'm not suggesting there can't be a thoughtful way to apply tariffs on a strategic basis selectively. But this across-the-board stuff that's really devastating and damaging, that's one way that Canada can be affected, because the supply chains for things like automobiles and for energy and for agriculture are intertwined, and we're deeply interdependent with the U.S. So when things happen in the United States economy and when tariffs get imposed, it's going to be hugely consequential for Canada. In terms of national security, if you think your ally isn't reliable and has turned on you, what do you do about that? Do you have to think about your own defense? Do you have to when the president says, why don't we just take Canada and make it the 51st state? You could say, well, this is a guy who's just says anything that pops into his mind and he couldn't possibly be serious. And the next breath he talks about Greenland and the Panama Canal. And, but on the other hand, it would appear that the United States at the moment is actually going to extract half of the patrimony of Ukraine in critical minerals as a condition of them settling the war in Ukraine in a way that doesn't hand everything over to Russia. I mean, the notion that the United States would extract this in a purely transactional way, give us your critical minerals or we're going to make an even worse deal for you in settling this war, is just sort of unthinkable. And if you're Canada watching that, maybe you take the guy seriously. Like, what is this guy going to do? So I can imagine a certain amount of reaction in Canada to these sorts of comments that come out of the administration. They're not used to this, right? This hasn't come from presidents in the past, these sort of undisciplined rhetorical flourishes about, what they're going to take and what they want and what they're going to look at. I think what the Canadian government has figured out, and what most people have figured out, is you can't react to everything. You have to think and wait and let things settle down and engage and be patient, because there's too much at stake to just react aggressively to every single thing they say. So that was a very long way of saying everything the U.S. does affects Canada. Tariffs are the most striking example, but Canada has a lot at stake with any presidential administration, and it doesn't have a choice to just disengage. right? Given the strength of the U.S. economy, the strength of the U.S. military, and the fact that we're the biggest trading partner, we have to pay attention to what the United States does, and we have to fortify our own economy to the extent we can against it. And we have to approach the U.S. with caution and with care. And that's just the political fate of being such a small neighbor on such a big border.
The change in the administration and threats of economic attack from a big ally has caused a radical change in the U.S.'s relationship with Canada, as you've mentioned, and a fundamental shift in how we view the U.S. Do Americans appreciate we are viewing this as a fundamental shift? And what is the view from the U.S.?
It's hard for me to reflect. There isn't one view from the U.S. You know, there are so many pockets, as we were talking about before. There's such a divided society with so many echo chambers. It's hard to encapsulate one American reaction. But I think it's fair to say a lot of Americans are surprised that the Trump administration is singling out Canada. I don't think too many Americans were sitting around thinking, oh, we really need to, punish Canada for its behavior. I think it was a bit of a surprise that this would turn into this conflagration over tariffs. On the other hand, he did on the campaign trail talk about tariffs. And I think their message to their supporters is, see, we're following through. And even though economists pretty much uniformly think this is very bad strategy for the U.S. economy and that consumers are going to pay the price in higher prices, because it's not like the tariffs get charged to the foreign government. The tariffs get charged to the importing company. It has to decide whether to pass it on to the American consumer or absorb some of it. And so I'm not sure American consumers understand that the tariffs are going to hurt them. But so far, there seems to be ongoing support for the willingness to wait and see about what the tariffs bring. In terms of Canada, the U.S., most American population probably thinks very positively about Canada. I'm originally Canadian. I'm down here in the U.S. for now the majority of my life. I don't observe hostility to Canada. So it just seems very disconnected and very strange. And of course, the administration backed right off, right? I mean, Prime Minister Trudeau promised to do something he'd already promised to do. And the Trump administration said, that's good enough. Okay, we're going to lift the threat for the moment. So what's going on here is gamesmanship and jockeying for power and some agenda that we're all trying to figure out vis-a-vis Canada. But the threat of the tariffs is real. He's willing to use that instrument. And the question is he going to follow through with this across-the-board idea with the Canadians? I will say I was absolutely delighted to see the Canadian reaction, to see really upset, reaction to the national anthem, the booing, and the sort of, the stuff we saw about boycotting American products, stuff like that. I have to say there was something just very heartening about that to see. I was warning friends of mine that, the Canadians are going to get mad. They're going to say they're very disappointed. They're really mad, and, then to see this and to win the hockey game, I was really happy about winning the hockey game. So that gave me that put a smile on my face.
Let me move now to environmental policy. During his first term, Trump has rescinded or weakened over 100 environmental regulations. And during his recent campaign, he committed to cutting back the landmark Inflation Reduction Act, reversing regulations on clean power and electric vehicles, and discontinuing renewable projects, and is once again withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. Harvard law professor Richard Lazarus has described what's happening as a siege on the nation's environmental laws. Can you explain what he means by that?
Well, first of all, Richard is my close colleague and wonderful friend. We're like the dynamic duo there. We do a lot of work together, and he is exactly right. The Trump administration, the first time around, as you said, did a mini version of all the things it's doing now, but now it's going even further. About 5 of the executive orders in the first few days had to do with energy policy and climate change. And one of them announces an American energy crisis, which is absolutely ridiculous. The U.S. is the largest producer of oil in the world. But the reason for this executive order was to announce that they would begin to stress fossil fuels above all other forms of energy, and to instruct agencies that they should go look at their statutes, their legal authorities, and look through them for any emergency powers they possibly have, and then think about deploying those emergency authorities in ways that would help unleash more fossil energy. So I think the idea here behind that order was to direct the agencies to do whatever they could to speed up permitting and remove obstacles to getting more oil and natural gas out of the ground. This drill, baby, drill agenda may not be something the industry really wants, actually, because it's not clear that they want to boost production. If they boost production, that could bring prices down. That's bad for the industry itself. So this push to unleash more fossil energy might not be what the market wants, but it is ideologically what the administration wants. And they clearly have a total disdain and disregard for climate change. So these executive orders represent pulling back every Biden climate policy. There was another order that focuses on essentially rescinding every Biden administration climate policy, ending what this administration, the Trump team, is calling the so-called EV mandate. There is no electric vehicle mandate in the United States, just to correct the record, but they're portraying the subsidies and grants that are designed to boost electric vehicle manufacturing, that are designed to help build more factories to produce batteries and so on. They're trying to portray that as a mandate that's forcing people to buy EVs, which is completely untrue. And this executive order was about ending the funding coming from the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill. These are two pieces of legislation Congress passed that puts billions of dollars into incentivizing the production of the components of electric vehicles, to subsidizing consumers buying electric vehicles. They're trying to pause all that funding, even though they can't do it. Congress would have to rescind tax credits. That's something Congress can do. But this executive order, in suggesting they're going to end the EV mandate, was meant to say the president has the power to stop all this funding going to these purposes, and we're going to claw back as much of these billions of dollars that Congress appropriated. We're going to try to claw as much of it back as possible, even if people have signed contracts for it, even if we've already approved the loans. And some of that is going to be unlawful, and they're trying it anyway. So these executive orders are designed to basically announce the intention to do those things. Then there was the executive order that was about withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. Again, as you noted, this would be the second time. The executive order acts like the country can do that immediately. The president can do that immediately. He can't. The Paris process requires a year to withdraw, so it won't take effect for a year. But basically, it's a signal. We're not interested in international climate negotiations anymore. And on we go across the board. And what Professor Lazarus was saying is, this is an all-out assault on environmental protection and on addressing climate change. And he's right about that. Two more things quickly I'll mention here. The administration looks like it's not just trying to roll back climate rules, like rules to control CO2 pollution from power plants, rules to control methane leaks from oil and gas facilities, rules to try to clean up cars' pollution of GHGs, and that would over time mean more of a share of the cars would be electric vehicles, low polluting or zero emitting vehicles. It's not just rolling back federal standards for those things. That is what we fully expected. But it looks now like the Trump administration, one of these executive orders set this in motion. It looks like the Trump administration is going to go after what's called the endangerment finding, meaning it's going to think about rescinding the scientific finding that the Environmental Protection Agency has made that greenhouse gases endanger health or welfare. And that finding is critical under the Clean Air Act. It's the legal predicate for issuing any regulations at all for greenhouse gases. You have to have an endangerment or you can't regulate. And one of the executive orders directed the EPA to look again at this finding. And the EPA just yesterday or the day before was supposed to report to the president what it was going to do about it. And one of the things it could do is actually rescind it, which would be like saying the science of climate change is no longer the science of climate change and there's no endangerment. I'm not sure they'll go that far, but it looks like they're trying to undermine the authority of the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases at all. And that is a new development, different from the first Trump administration. It looks like they're going to go as far as they can down that road, much farther than they tried to go the first time. And the second thing they are trying to do is eliminate California's authority which it has under the Clean Air Act, to independently set its own standards for cars and trucks, which has always been a big driver, forgive the metaphor, a big driver, big engine of moving car standards forward, because California is a very big market in the United States, and other states can follow California and adopt their rules. And what the Trump administration seems to be wanting to do is knock out that special power that California has under the Clean Air Act. And that would remove a very powerful state as a backup to the federal standards. So these are two things they didn't do in the first term that I think they're trying to do this time.
How could this impact Canada, particularly the EV mandate or the Paris Agreement withdrawal? Would Canada potentially withdraw as well?
Well, it doesn't help when the United States withdraws. I think that can embolden other countries that may be considering doing the same. Removes one of the historical leaders from international negotiations. With President Obama and President Xi from China together helped get that agreement over the line. And I think China will be more than happy to occupy the leadership role now without the United States. In terms of its effect on Canada, I'm not sure politically whether what's happening politically in terms of the leadership contest and what politicians are saying now. I don't want to speculate about that too much, but it's certainly possible that other countries will feel they have cover now to withdraw, since the United States has. And certainly those that were weak to, wobbling may feel like now's the time. So I don't think it's helpful. And what Canada does, of course, will have more to do with its domestic politics than anything else. But it's certainly not helpful. In terms of, withdrawing the Inflation Reduction Act money to the extent that they can claw it back, and trying to get Congress to rescind some of these tax credits and subsidies so that they don't go forward, that's probably not very good for Canadian auto manufacturing, for the auto industry, because, as I say, our supply chains are so interdependent and Canadian manufacturing is so tied to U.S. manufacturing. And so if this is bad for the U.S. auto industry, which is making a pivot to electric vehicles for global reasons, for market reasons, if this is bad for the U.S. auto industry, it's certainly going to spill over and be bad, I would suggest, for the Canadian economy as well.
So the president of the Canadian Climate Institute, Rick Smith, expects state governments to respond by stepping up as they did during Trump's first term, believing that the progress to cut emissions will continue in the U.S. despite the Trump administration holding back or separating them from environmental policies at a federal level. Do you expect to see the same proactivity from the states? And what about the state-led efforts like the Western Climate Initiative, which is the cap-and-trade system that includes both California and Quebec?
Yeah, it's always been true that when the federal government has retreated from playing a leadership role on environmental protection or climate change, particularly, that the states have tried very hard, at least some of the states, what we all sort of would refer to as the blue states, the Democratic states. I don't like those labels because, of course, these states are full of lots of Republicans and Democrats and independents and everything. So I don't, but there's a subset of states that have always stepped forward, California, New York, and various others. And they'll do that again. They'll keep moving on their own agenda. California has a cap and trade law to control greenhouse gas emissions that also raises a lot of money that then winds itself pouring back into the economy of the state. I foresee these regional alliances surviving, regional alliances that I think Rick was referring to, and cross-border alliances. And I think that's great. And I think the states will be called on to step into the vacuum. But the truth of the matter is some small subset of states, even if it were not small, even if it was 10 or 20 states committed to cutting their greenhouse gases and making progress on clean energy, is not the same as a federal United States government leaning into this and playing a leadership role. It's just not the same. So it's not a substitute. But I do think even states that are so-called red states will be doing some of this work. They just won't be calling it climate change policy. There are states that have huge wind resources and huge solar capacity, and they'll be investing in those energy sources for financial reasons, for economic development reasons, because they bring jobs and because they help shore up the electricity supply with secure, reliable energy. And so I think we're going to still see forward motion, but it's just not going to be as coordinated as when it's underpinned by a federal government. So in terms of total volume of emissions of greenhouse gases lost, we're going to lose some of our emissions reductions, I would suggest. It's going to be hard to measure that, but we probably won't make the progress we would have made otherwise, for sure. States will play as big a role as they can. Certainly there are some states that will be real laggards that won't be doing much on this at all. The other area of positive energy will be The market. I mean, the market is the market. That is, there is a global demand for electric vehicles, for example, and Chinese manufacturers are moving to fill it. And if the US falls behind in being part of the clean energy transition, if they don't want to compete in a new 21st century auto market, if they don't want to be leaders in producing clean, low to zero emission vehicles, they're just going to lose global market share. And the beneficiary most likely to gain is China. So I view this in terms of American innovation and competition and competitiveness. And we're going to lose because this will be a setback for U.S. innovation and competitiveness. And I think the states can try to help that engine move, but the market's going to move regardless. And so business might just say, we don't really care if you pull back these subsidies. We have to remain competitive. We have to invest in the clean energy transition and move forward regardless of what the federal government does. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm hoping for. Same with utilities, electricity. The companies that are generating electricity for the energy supply, they're already retiring coal plants. They're not trying to build more coal. It's not economic. It doesn't compete. They're moving to a more diversified set of resources, including wind and solar. They're developing storage capacity for these intermittent sources. They have made investments. They don't make investment on 4-year cycles for one presidency. They make investments in 20, 30, 40-year cycles. And so business has the ability to look beyond an administration and play the long game where it sees global markets moving. It's going to move in that direction. So my hope, the reason I'm citing this to you is my hope is that there will be enough market pressure, enough incentive for business to keep moving forward. The clean energy transition is not a 4-year deal. It's not a 10-year deal, and it's not even a couple of decades. This is a century-long transition. I wish it were quicker. Maybe I'll be proved wrong and we'll move to cleaner energy faster. That's certainly my hope. But it's a longer-term process, and no one administration is going to derail it. That's the most positive thing I can say. They can cause a lot of pain on the way, but I think between the states and between the private sector actors and global trends, I think we're going to continue along this path. Maybe slower than we hoped without the United States playing a leadership role, but I think that my hope is this administration will be a blip.
To conclude, I just want to ask you, in what way in your work are you responding to the Trump administration's policies?
We at Harvard have a program at the law school called the Environmental and Energy Law Program. And I'm the director of that program, and we have a set of staff attorneys and experts, and we have a raft of student research assistants. And we produce a lot of legal analysis and research about regulatory policy. And so we have a tracker that tracks all the shifts between administrations, whether it's from Obama to Trump, Trump to Biden, Biden back to Trump. So we perform a public service in tracking and publicizing and explaining and analyzing all of these developments and their legal implications. We also help to bring different voices into the regulatory process. When the Biden administration was drafting climate rules, we helped by providing legal analysis. We brought industry players in to make comments on these rules to make sure they would be durable, that industry could implement them. So we try to play a facilitating role to make sure the regulatory system will be robust around climate change. And as I say, we monitor, track, analyze, explain. We engage with the media to make sure they understand what's going on. So that program is hugely successful, and I'm very proud of it. I'm super proud of our staff and extremely proud of our students who do a bunch of research. We also have an environmental law clinic at Harvard Law School, which is a course students take. You're probably familiar with this from your own law school, where they sign up to work on live cases. And so we have certain clients that we take on where we're participating in litigation, lawsuits to help advance clean energy and progress on climate, and also protecting natural resources like water, clean water, and a variety of other environmental public health issues. So we have cases on those that the students participate in our clinic. We're also setting up a moot court, a new moot court institute, where we're going to moot cases moving through the lower courts that we anticipate will come during this administration and beyond, to provide a place for the people bringing those lawsuits to practice and to get expert input from people we will bring in to help moot the cases, judges and academics and other experts. So we're performing that service. I'm also part of the larger Harvard Climate Institute, which is sort of an umbrella over all the campus activities, where I do events there, and we conduct a lot of research on a variety of projects. We're conducting a big cross-disciplinary research project on methane control, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, as you know. And so we are collaborating with scientists and economists, and we at the law school and the business school, studying all of these efforts to measure and reduce methane. Likewise, I'm part of a big project across universities studying corporate net zero commitments, what's happening to the corporate sector commitments to control their emissions. Different companies have made these commitments. Are they making progress on those? Are they real, or are they greenwashing? And so we have a big study of that. So there's a lot of research going on. There's my center going on. Of course, I'm teaching courses in all these things, teaching courses in administrative law and regulation, teaching courses in environmental law. And then in my private time, in my capacity, I do things like this. I go on podcasts, and I speak out, and I write blog posts, and I write op-eds, and I participate in my areas of expertise and provide commentary. I never speak for Harvard. None of us speak for Harvard when we do this, but we do speak in our professional capacities with our expertise. And so I think it's incumbent on me to do that, to be part of explaining the consequences of what the administration is doing, to talk about the law, to talk about what they're doing differently, what might be unlawful, what might be unconstitutional, and to explain that to people. And I see that as a real obligation I have, part of this, really important moment when I see legal institutions at risk.
Well, it sounds like you're doing some incredible work. I truly learn something new about you every single day, just a side note. But so thank you so much for joining us. The time that you have is very precious, and we're so happy to have you.
I'm, of course, your aunt. And so I just want to say that I have the delight of getting to do this with you, my first podcast with you. Maybe we'll do more or find other ways to collaborate. I'm so proud of you that you're pursuing a law school career. Not that I ever pushed you in that direction, but I'm just saying I'm so proud of you. It's wonderful to get a chance to share this with you and to have you really understand the stakes of all this. And that's really touching to me. That's really important to me. So I'm super happy you invited me to do this. And I'm so proud of you. So thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you. It's my first podcast, and luckily my first one with you. But it's been a very enlightening experience. No, but in grade 6, I wrote an essay, which was probably 2 paragraphs, but it was an essay about who inspires you the most. And I wrote about you. And now I feel like I have to write a new one because it'll probably be 300 pages long with all the stuff that you do after hearing that. Anyway, but I want to, before we finish, do you have any final thoughts or advice you'd like to share with our listeners?
My big message is engage. And even, you might say, well, we're Canadian. What do we have to do with this U.S. stuff? I don't know that I agree with that. Engage. All of us have ways of influence. People bring different things to the table. Some people are in positions of power. They're in elected positions, and they have more hands-on, more levers to do things. Some people are activists, and they bring that. Some people are smart analysts, and they can write and put material out into the public. Some people are great public speakers. They can go speak. Some people have energy to spend working at institutions that they know are fighting for the things they believe in and against the things that they oppose. Some people have money. Some people have time and energy to spend. All I'm saying is figure out what you have to give and your resources, whatever they are, and engage in the things you believe in. That's my message to my law students. And especially, I believe we need to defend what I think are perhaps abstract ideas, but they're not abstract. They're very real. The rule of law on which our society depends, respect for institutions and expertise. You can change things. We all want to change things. You should want to change things. You should be upset about how the society isn't delivering on all the things you want. But there are lawful ways to do that. And there are ways to change the system that don't blow it up and do more harm than good. And my suggestion is you law students are in the right place, getting the right education you need to contribute to improving the society, making it better for everybody. And I would just encourage you to take these things you're learning, take these tools you have, take these opportunities and make the most of them, and think of yourself as owing a debt to society and contributing something back to it. That's what I tell my students, and that's what I hope for you guys too.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about Professor Freeman or her work, we have attached her socials in the program description. And I also want to give a big thank you to my partner Dylan for producing the episode and making it possible. That concludes part 2 of our discussion with Professor Freeman.
The Hearsay podcast is a joint project between CJSW 90.9 FM and Pro Bono Students Canada, University of Calgary chapter. If you would like to hear more podcasts like this, the Hearsay podcast can be found on Google Podcasts, Apple Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.